guys, welcome to the podcast. My name is Christian here, and I'm here with the Greydruid, my friend. And we're going to go over some topics here: remote viewing, ET phenomenon, Dr. Stephen Greer, how that all connects. And it's also going to be a little open-ended because other things are going to come up. So we're going to get started. And I guess to start, tell me how you tell me your background is with remote viewing, or at least maybe that's how you got started in all this.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's really cool connecting with you, and
Yeah,
glad
of
we've
course.
had our different
Yeah,
conversations.
thanks for agreeing to jump on. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I got really interested in kind of the weird paranormal stuff growing up. What was
Yeah,
behind the veil, so to speak. When I was, early adult, so I ended up joining up with a group that helped with locating missing people and different things with limited to no information. And I did that for about 4 years, and that was something that I didn't know it had a name. It
yeah,
wasn't until afterwards that I realized it was something called remote viewing. I got out of it. It took a lot of emotional toll. When I started researching into the Stargate program, ran for 18 years, and Inigo Swan, he had a lot of interviews that he had with radio show hosts and stuff. I started listening to his stuff, and I was like, oh my god, like this man's done so much and sounds like a really sweet soul. And also he had similar experiences that I could relate with, when I was doing that. It wasn't just going into, oh, this is cool, this is UFO alien stuff, this is weird, but it was like something I had actually experienced. Really wild. And especially coming from a very religious background, I had experiences that I shouldn't have believed outright.
right.
So once I started researching various people in the military that had gone through these kind of programs, and then they had done these things of remote viewing and being able to get information from other places by just projecting their perception and different things like that, and where they really took more of a scientific look at this, because if it's a program in the military for 18 years, it has to be proven, it has to work.
That's what I've said. Like, why spend all this money or this time doing this with all these documents and sheets explaining how to go through the process of remote viewing? I have some of those documents too, so I've gone through them. But yeah, it's just too articulate. Like, they spend too much time on it, and
Right.
they do explain. I'll put some of the up on the screen here too for anyone watching, so they can see them.
Yeah, and Ingo Swan, in one of his interviews, some of the interviews I've been cutting, various clips for, he goes in and mentions that I think they were proving it every month or two to higher ups to make sure that this was viable, and that the money they were putting into is actually going to go towards being able to have research military-wise into this being a practical application. So
Right.
that's something that, they had to prove with scientists and physicists, and that's why it's so fascinating for me, because it's not just people that are saying, hey, I'm psychic and stuff like that. There was people in the room with degrees and part of the government and military that had to prove them wrong. Essentially, that was their
Yeah.
job. These people that were very well respected in their field, they started doing remote viewings on the moon or various places in
Oh,
the arm.
Mars.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they start seeing things that's a little outside of the normal. There's a certain merit to that, right? Why would they just be all lying about these various details when they were being applied to other areas and being very efficient at their job?
There's another thing about science is that, if you can repeat a test and you have, repeatable results that just keep coming in every time you try it, especially with a particular person who, let's say, is good at it, then you have a pattern. And if you have a pattern and there's consistency, then something is happening. It's not just, at what point do you say it's not coincidence anymore? And
Right.
I do know that they mentioned some of the people who worked for some of these programs had mentioned that on paper they said they don't do them anymore, but they're well aware that they're still doing them. And we
Right.
do already have, so we still have some places that openly admit to studying this stuff. We have the Monroe Institute. We also have the Institute of Noetic Sciences, where they actually hook up mediums to like EEG, do triple blind tests with strangers and stuff like that. And they have remote viewing type tests. So yeah,
Yep.
it's still ongoing.
Inigo made a really good point as well, as he said that if a program is proven that you can get information from pretty much anywhere, why would you have that be out in the open? That would be something, as soon as you could prove it and that you could essentially put that on a black book, you would.
Yeah.
100%. And this is something that through my own experiences I've had happen, where I get information from a target or location. And again, I don't know
And
how it all works. I don't know how,
same with some of my stuff. I don't either. I just do it.
right. And I guess that's the thing too, like seeing a lot of people like on TikTok or, social media where they're talking about like, I want to learn it or I want to do it. Part of it is just got to do it essentially. I don't feel like there's really a specific formula to it. And that was something I know that we talked about previously, if you wanted me to kind of share some of my techniques with it, which I can, but like ultimately it comes down to what centers you and what makes you feel grounded in yourself, and then you're able to project.
I was going to ask you a question, because being that you're able to remote view, I'm under the assumption that you can picture an image in your mind. And I didn't know until recently that some people can't even picture things in their mind. Like if I told them to imagine a rose, I had an ex who, she's like, I can't picture a rose. I know what you're talking about, but I can't picture a rose in my mind. I was like, what? And I looked this up, and apparently that's true. So can you like visualize, like if I say picture a rose, you can visualize a rose in your mind?
Yeah.
I feel like it might be easier for people like that too.
For example, in Swan, he was an artist and he did various amounts of stuff. Listen to him; he's very expressionistic and very like, tell he's a soulful type person. So I don't know if that's connected, And again, like as much as we talk about like psychics and everything like that, all these kind of crazy superpowers, I do think that there are certain aspects that people have when it comes to strengths and weaknesses. And I don't know if it's just a perceptual awareness that certain people have where they're more sensitive. If you were to tell me to do the same stuff I were to do now versus then, I would be really rusty at it.
I get it.
It's like it's a muscle. Also, like stress and various other things can happen where it deadens your perception or your awareness of things, or even yourself.
Right.
So that is why a smaller pool of people that can do it versus others. I don't understand how it works. It was an area that I felt like I wanted to help and I needed to help, and I just so happened to have a strength in that way of being able to do this stuff. I don't know. Listening to some of his interviews, he feels like he had similar stuff where he was just like, oh, just did it, and stuff happened. So okay, cool. Right. Like, but
what do you know about? I think I have his name right. Uri Geller. He could do this because he had mentioned doing some stuff, and he would even like draw for people, bending spoons. He would do that. He had a weird.
I think I've heard of him. I know there was certain people that try to discredit him or various other things.
Yeah, I heard that too. From listening to him, I align with what he's saying from the stuff that I know about, spirituality and other things. But yeah, I'm not like a pro on him specifically. I was just wondering if you heard of him, because he did some remote viewing stuff too. So I wasn't sure.
Right. I want to mention as well with the remote viewing is a lot of stuff that I've heard people talk about, like feedback or the way that they would get information. That's not just images, but it's like feeling, and you get smell or you get sense of the area or the people. It's like you're getting extra sensory information that it's really hard for you to put into English language.
Right. I can agree with that from my own experiences.
I think the reason why more of the stuff lately with disclosures and different things that's been happening that's interesting is because these, again, are ex-military people that are coming out, and they have credentials to back them up versus just somebody that is coming out of the woodwork saying that, hey, I was abducted by an alien, Different remote viewers have remote view to areas where there are ET presence or other things, and these ETs can sense them there.
I think it's key, and I honestly think the ETs or beings are already at a level, not just socially, but consciousness wise, where those abilities are just kind of like talking, like they're just so normal to them. That's why they can do things like that. And it's funny how you hear about people having, or abductees having, communication with ETs, and how it's like telepathic or showing me images in my head, things like, you hear that a lot. And it kind of makes sense, like what would a socially developed, possibly spiritually developed civilization, like what could they do? I think the whole remote viewing thing and mediumship and all this stuff we call like supernatural is really just natural, and we're only starting to like now realize it, because many a year ago, not that long ago, but a stone throw away, like you would get burned at the stake for talking about this. You're a witch all of a sudden. But now we're more accepting of it.
Both of our backgrounds coming out of religion, I remember having various experiences with people who were spiritual, and then they put on the status of like, well, God is telling me this information, he wants to let you know, and it would be spot on. Like it would be like, oh, you're reading like where I am right now. Oh, this happened to you when you were a kid, and this, and they'll read your life story, right? Getting out of dogma and then going into trying to understand things more on a metaphysical level. We don't really understand all these supernatural things are actually natural things, just we don't understand these realities.
Like you don't go to school and they're not going to tell you about like the people you referenced and the remote viewing and the documents and all of that. They don't teach you that. So when you go to school telling you that this is all that's real, and then you have another outside influence trying to tell you, no, this is also real, it's harder because you've been entrenched in, I guess, a belief system.
People that are in it that push, a certain agenda or religion, I've tried my best to understand that it was in their heart to make sure, I wasn't going down a wrong path or whatever else.
Right.
It's okay to not know, and it's okay to be in the flow of like just experiencing life and connecting with others. I've done different things in remote viewing. I'm not going to come on here online and say that I know everything or anything like that.
What helped me, especially like reading, looking into near-death experiences, especially because it's all about, the people who come from those experiences. Maybe they were jerks prior to the near-death experience, but now they're not a jerk. And they come from like a greater level of understanding because of what they're shown on the other side, and that we're all one and connected, and we have to learn how to accept each other for where we're at. And what I came out of that is that everyone is at their own level of awareness. You know what I mean? And sometimes too, like some people are at reading level 2 and some people are at like reading level 10, and trying to expect someone to like understand, or let's say a belief system or religion or whatever, to try to understand certain concepts that they may not be ready to look at, that's okay. And from what they were saying, we're all eternal. And I always looked at it as we have forever to figure it out anyway. So what's the rush? You know what I mean? It's no big deal. As long as we're kind about it, you know what I mean? We don't have to attack other people for not seeing. And I think it's a beautiful thing for everyone to have a unique perspective. Because imagine if everyone thought the same. It's gotta be boring.
Partly what makes a lot of this ET stuff really interesting too is,
right.
We have so many brothers and sisters in reality. Whether we see us as planet or people to a higher state of consciousness, I don't know if that'll happen in our lifetime. Probably won't. Who knows? I would really love to come back in another life. Things to be a little bit more cohesive in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I said the same thing because I was like, I had to come back and it was like this again. I was like, I don't. I mean, life can be beautiful, sure, from time to time, but like just seeing the discord and people suffering and a lot of the stuff, Greer has mentioned like suppression of free energy technology and how it could be. I would love to be born into a civilization that is already there, where you get to experience more of this beautiful world without the need for like borders or weaponry, or if craft exists, you can get on a craft. Imagine getting on a craft and going wherever you want for free. Yeah, I would be an explorer. I would love to explore.
I was telling my girlfriend, I was like, man, wonderful, it'd be great. Imagine some Greys live Greys next door. Things are more than they seem, right?
Right.
Especially with how hard life is, economy, and everything else that we're struggling with. It's like a little bit of a light, of like understanding, like, okay, in the end, things will be okay. Like in the end,
because it's happening. Something's happening. It's weird. It's like people have been saying they can kind of feel it. It's like tangible, something in the air. I know
Right.
people are kind of waking up to this stuff. People are getting mad, hopefully not violent, but just starting to see the patterns, and they're like, okay, we know the jig is up. Like, come on, it's time. Greer had mentioned some of this stuff too. Yeah, you had mentioned before we started something about Greer and how you felt. And I just wanted to say, like, about how his character, like, who he is. And I have to agree. And I liked, there were some things like the Cosmic Hoax, I believe it was, where you get to actually see, and it was the first time for me seeing him actually get emotional, like full on crying from the people he's lost. And one of his friends had mentioned, she's like, don't you ever stop. She was being interviewed, and Greer was actually behind the camera, and she's like, don't you ever stop. I'll always be with you. Don't you give up. And she walks, and then somebody, I guess, takes the camera and like points it towards them, and you see him like just crying in the director's seat or whatever. He's just crying.
And world peace should have happened at the end of World War I. We have to have universal peace. At this point, world peace is too late. We're already in an interstellar moment. We're already in a cosmic time. So we have to have universal peace. And universal peace comes from both our external policies and behaviors and from within, the great peace within, the state of universal consciousness. As we wrap up this film, we are seeing the threat narrative intensify by the day. Language like, "We need to stop trying to contact aliens," seems to confirm my long-held suspicion that CE5 would be blamed for a staged alien attack. Do not believe this lie.
This isn't entertainment. This is our survival. I saw that Dr. Greer would never stop doing this until he took his last breath, and that he needed help with this. This is not about us. It's not about, fame, fortune, money. There is no money anyway in all this. It's about finding a group of people that have the same vision, but the most beautiful vision he has. And I've attended so many CE5s, is that he has found a way, a non-hostile way, to communicate with who's ever out there, because whoever's out there is depending on him to change this situation. So that, for me, is the most important. The CE5 protocols that everybody can do is going to make a darn difference. So for me, the Disclosure Project is a miracle. And it hasn't been easy. It has not been easy. Can I give you a hug? I love you. You just keep going. We're here. You just keep going, okay? I'll never leave you, so you just keep going. Do what you do. And do what you do the best, because if we don't do it, nobody's gonna do it. Do you understand that? Okay.
I feel like that's important because it humanizes someone.
Yeah, I know that look and I know that feeling. So him talking about people he's lost because of this type of thing, the stuff that he is involved and he's trying to get out, I believe him. That's a whole thing, because I know a lot of people in the UFO community don't believe Greer, that don't think he's legitimate because, he's making money off his documentaries or, doing things where he's taking people out. People have a right to feel mistrustful of things that make money. There's got to be an edge here. If someone's doing something that you have no funding for or various other things, not really going to get anywhere that really fast, I don't know him. I don't know the people around him. I do believe what he believes in is legitimate. The fact that they're going to Congress and talking about people for years. If someone was just wanting to make money in the UFO community, they would just do it a lot easier ways and be able to make a lot of money. If they really are involved with people that are on these black programs and counterintelligence and other things, counterintelligence and intelligence in general, good majority of information is going to be put out there that's going to be fake in some way, because that's how intelligence works, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So that's just the name of the game. So if he's like coming out and saying, hey, we really want to get this out, we have these people in place, we're trying to get this technology out, it doesn't happen for like years. Because I read through forums and various people talking about like, yeah, you said this, but it was like 10 years ago. Like, yeah, that's how things usually work. Like, things don't come out because there's various people that'll put a stop to them, especially if it's turning into like the oil and gas industry,
Yeah.
$1 trillion industries. They're not going to let it get out. They're not going to let it get out until there's enormous pressure. There's either enormous pressure for them to lose money or they have an incentive to make money off of it. Besides that, they're not going to let that get off. And then they're going to make anybody disappear that has potential causing issues or danger to their money and their organizations. The different whistleblowers coming out, and they're all have been talking about these programs not necessarily being under the actual government, but being through corporations and these black projects, which legally makes a lot more sense, because then you have all these segmented areas that they, if someone comes looking, they're like, yeah, it's NDA, you can't say anything about it, and then they can ship that off to wherever, right? If it was just a bunch of people talking like out their ass about it,
Yeah.
it'd be a lot easier to just say it's the government and it's just a blanket thing, right? Why would you have all these details of like various corporations being involved and different things like that?
Very good point. And if it's a corporation, they don't have to reach out to the government to tell them anything. So it's like
they don't have to say shit to them.
Yeah, because it's like, this is our thing, you know what I mean? Or what are you talking about? They could lie if they want to and not get in trouble, or they could say whatever they want. And apparently insiders are saying that's how it works. We hand it over to a corporation. The corporation will work on it for a little bit, and they're like, only tell us if something like, good comes up, but you don't really have paperwork that you're handing over to the government. They're like, here you go, government. This is what we've done so far. Yeah. They don't, they can, claim, they can deny it. They're like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And there's no paperwork. You know what I mean? There's nothing to say anything. You just have these private meetings that go on that we're not privy to. So
they're potentially in, league with, let's say, these black projects or whatever, illegal stuff or what have you. They can hire out private military and various other people that you have no trace whatsoever of potential hitmen or other, whatever going on to make keeping things secret, or these illegal operations going. There was one of the whistleblowers during Greer's live stream. He was talking about potential human trafficking that was happening, where they were putting these cargoes, containers into this UAP and a human UAP. And when he got back to the base after being threatened, the military had him sign an NDA.
There's a lot of other correlation that some people don't know, or they're not tying together. They recently released a documentary before this interview, before Sound of Freedom came out. There was a documentary that came out called Trance. And it was about Kathy O'Brien, who claims to have been a part of these human trafficking, and so was her daughter. And she tells her whole story, how they do it, the mind manipulation thing, how they go about the process of controlling the masses through music and media and things like that to shift your attention to something else. And she talks about the horrors of this trafficking. She mentions the UFO stuff also, surprisingly. And then we have the Sound of Freedom come out, and she's saying that this is the human trafficking is one of the biggest ways they make their money. Secret government, whatever you want to call them. That's one of the biggest ways that they make their money. And then you have I think it's Michael Herrera, I think, the Marine, who sees this shipping container that he was led to believe now that they were trafficking humans. And then you start connecting all these dots, and you're like, wait a minute. And then you have the Sound of Freedom come out, this whole movie against, human and child trafficking. And the amount of pressure to get rid of this movie, to shoot it down, to make fun of the people going to see it. And apparently now I saw another video where multiple people across the states were saying that the air conditioning wasn't working in the theater with those movies playing. And it kind of leads me to believe, like, with the whole free energy stuff, like how they suppress that and how they suppress it well. And this is like one of those things that they want to suppress, kind of thing, because now you're seeing them bash it, and it's all about, we all know human trafficking happens. It's not a myth, you know what I mean? So it's just strange.
It even makes you question your own perspective, because you're like, am I am I going down this weird rabbit hole of being completely crazy, you know? And I think part of that is it's a very intricate web that's designed to catch people that may be catching on to something, and then they either go crazy or brand it as crazy, you know?
It's perfectly hidden because even if you go there, it's built in such a way that you can just.
It's fragmented and part of the defense mechanism, right?
Right.
It's like reminds me of the NIDS program. They wanted them to look into the UAP stuff that was happening there. And then they started crossing into cryptids and a bunch of other things, the hitchhiker effect, which they were there.
Oh, yeah, supernatural stuff
would attach to them. They would have paranormal stuff happening. They would see dogmen, crazy stuff, orbs, just weird stuff. And then when they get these reports back, the government's like, "Why are you guys wasting this money on these things?" And they're like, "You told us to research this, and these are the avenues we're going down." I don't think UAPs, the ET versions, are negative. I think that being pushed as being potential threats and stuff, that's to position us in a way that we're all scared and defensive against these entities or people or civilization that's been with us for potentially thousands of years.
Me and my friend were talking about this, and we thought that not every ET was good because, I mean, we're diverse also. But then I also come against, like, how do you get to be a socially evolved race, species, whatever, without killing yourselves if you don't get to some level of enlightenment and understanding? And it's crazy because I'm like, some of the research that I'm doing is that when you start going towards this benevolent, the thing is, I see more positive in what I'm researching. And even to what people talk about negative abduction experiences, to the person, there's like trauma. But then when, Dolores Cannon, she does this hypnotherapy, and when she gets the full story and the person's able to process it, it's not as bad as we were led to believe. And it's not for the reasons that they thought. It's only when the person's left with not remembering or filler memories, whatever you want to call that, that they believe something crazy happened. And technically, in a way, it is kind of crazy because if you were visited for one reason or another, and we don't have to get into it on this episode, but some of the stuff is like soul agreements. That's what's come up, like giving consent before you go through some kind of a process with other people. But either way, it's not as dark as people are led to believe. But then there's always the possibility of like I mean, with all the other crazy stuff that we see, the world war and all the other things that have happened, I wouldn't put it past them to fake an invasion or to fake an abduction, to start this slow process or agenda for promoting fear, because the powers that be are afraid of what the enlightening ETs want to share that could free us. So it makes sense to put fear out there to disempower people so that they stay, zombies, essentially, slaves or sheeple, whatever you want to call it.
Involves money and power. People do a lot of things to keep that. They would do everything to keep that, especially people that are in those places.
And the whole point is to do it without getting caught. So if you're going to do that, what better guys than a topic like extraterrestrials, where a lot of people still don't believe it. More people now than before, but before there was like a lot of people who still would call, "Oh, you're crazy," or you're making stuff up. I also think that's human arrogance to think we've figured everything out already and we know all there is. It's funny because it really is the perfect place to hide. It's like in plain sight, own defense mechanism, because all you need is people who haven't had a lick of experience, research into this or whatever, to be like, "Oh, that's BS." But then some of the skeptics themselves have an experience, and then now they're on the other side of the fold,
So were you a skeptic for this stuff?
So honestly, no. How it started for me was I always believed that we were not alone in the universe. But at the time when I was younger, I was like, well, I don't work for government. I'm not anyone important up there. So I might never know. Maybe they'll keep this hidden forever and I'll never know. I don't know. So why spend the effort of looking? I'll believe, but looking, if something interesting catches my eye, I'll look at it a little bit. but I don't go full gung ho into research. Now, what's interesting was I had a very strong experience with sleep paralysis, seeing beings, mediumship stuff. And I had one really powerful dream that after the dream, I was pushed to look up near death experiences, which was strange because I heard of them before, but I never researched them. So I decided to research them. And the more I started to discover about researching near death experiences and consciousness, remote viewing, and all of that stuff, it brought me right back into the ET phenomenon, because essentially all of these topics actually connect to each other, which I never knew. And I was like, and this is kind of why I'm doing this now, because it's like so many people will talk about the ET stuff, whether they believe or not, whether it's cool, it's cool. Oh, the idea of it's cool, whatever. And they're like, oh, I want to see the craft, or what did the being look like? But they're not connecting the dots between consciousness. And I started finding in abduction cases going under hypnotherapy. Some people weren't even abduction cases, but they would go into hypnotherapy and they would go into a past life, or to get more information out, or to get more out of their supernatural experiences. And I found out that they were all saying the same things. And I was like, why would abductees be saying the same things that near-death experiences are saying? It was just very, and I was like, started connecting all these dots, and it's all about, the consciousness, the soul, that we don't actually die. And that's exactly what the abductees were saying, that the beings were sharing with them that we are essentially all one. They're waiting for us to gain this understanding that death is really an illusion and we're connected by something much greater than we think, that we do have a soul, or there is such a thing as a creator, source, or whatever, God, whatever you want to call it. And it's a part of everything, all that is, and that we have to understand. And apparently the ETs have this understanding that everything is alive or has consciousness, even down to a rock, that everything is based on the same structure that builds what we call existence, three-dimensional, or even in other dimensions, it's all part of the same thing. And there's this universal connection. So that's when it really started to solidify for me. And that's when I started researching more into the UFO phenomenon, connecting more dots and stuff like that, going back to movies that I watched and thought, oh, that's cool. That's interesting. I rewatched Dr. Greer's documentary, excuse me, and they made way more sense with this knowledge of near-death experiences and the abductee cases explaining about consciousness, past life regression, hypnotherapy. So that's what happened to me. And it may sound like a big rabbit hole, but it makes sense the more you go into it. So
it's all interconnected. That's the weird thing about
Yeah.
it too. In the middle of when I was doing my remote viewing and stuff, because things were so intense, I started having past life memories and stuff, and it completely messed with me, because I was like I was teetering into Christian, but I was like, the whole like
it's a struggle.
eternal life and heaven, and that's where I go and all that stuff. And that started happening, and I was like, oh my God. But at the same time, it also settled me of like, oh yeah, oh, I can breathe, because this is not the only life I've had.
The relief I've had the
Yeah, the relief where you're just like, okay, cool, I can chill a little bit, where I don't feel like it's
Yeah.
just this life.
The
This
fear
perception
kind of
of it,
just
right, dissipates. It's like, okay, well, this version of me will not be around obviously next time or previously, but it's like kind of the whole like Avatar: Last Airbender, you have the previous
yeah.
avatars, like
Incarnation.
they're all
Still the same
just
soul.
different. Same higher soul, but like personality and who that person is very different from each one. Like that makes so much sense. And when you start talking about higher consciousness, that just innately kind of ends up being the end idea. And I think also too, just taking yourself out of the spiritual aspects of everything. If you just look at nature and how reciprocal it is, life, death, and like birth, and that whole thing, that whole process of the universe, that aspect of reincarnation or energy transference, where there's always motion and movement.
I agree.
And always things are moving, that's something that just makes more sense than a heaven necessarily. And I've never done drugs before. I put myself in a trance, and I had an outer body experience, which again,
I've had one of those.
Having similar stuff in church and then having stuff in remote viewing, it'll all kind of be similar experiences, but little twists of chain differences, it just made me more like, oh, yeah, it's all, of course it is. It's always all connected to the same higher source of like
Right.
awareness. Breaking through that veil, you know, you're like, oh yeah, I'm not just a human, I'm this. I'm the universe, and the universe is me, and like this connection, and my connection with others is always flowing, and always like the sense of being alone is an illusion. And so that's something that was really cool, experiencing that again. It was really healing for me, especially with how I left the church, that having that community cut off and being seen as like, you know, other, so to speak, by friends or family. So, you know, just remembering that, and just remembering like how connected we really are, and, you know, again, our sense of self is an illusion. And
Yeah,
it's always good to be reminded of.
When I let go of religion, there were questions I was looking for, and I wasn't happy with the answers I was getting. I was raised Catholic, you know, did a communion and everything, and it just felt like something was missing to me. And then I remember the day that I just finally decided, okay, I'm going to let this go. And at first, you know, you have this fear because of like, oh, what if I go to hell, you know, because I just let this go. And then, but this overwhelming sense of just peace, it felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. I felt free. It was challenging because it's like sometimes you come across information that you want to just tell people or share with people you care about, and they may not see the same thing. So it can be isolating. But I feel more comfortable now that people are like waking up all over. And it's kind of crazy that I'll have conversations with strangers and they know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's just, I feel like that was not a thing like 20 years ago, not as much, you know, as now, which is a relief. And to hear from people's near death experiences, to say that, no, you're not going to hell, you know, like, and that's not how it works. And, you know, we're unconditionally loved and we're here to learn lessons. And I'm like, oh God, I was like, oh, thank God, you know, but you can experience negative things on the other side from what I've heard, read, and looked into, because it's a conscious reality. I think that some people put themselves there based on their beliefs. That's my theory anyway, because every time anyone has started with a negative NDE or something, the moment they ask for help using their free will to ask, they are assisted. Every time they, but then there are some people who never ask and just had the NDE experience, to my knowledge, and then the negative NDE, and that's what they're left with. And now they're afraid. But even then, those people have said that even though it was extremely negative, it helped them surpass something, overcome something. It was like something that they needed.
I do think that is genuinely a thing. I think that is something that connects to people that are going through really hard times, or they have really bad trauma, or, you know, different things that then they attach to. And there's like this, you know, we would probably describe it religiously as demons or whatever else, you know. And that's, again, that is, don't want to go down that rabbit hole, because that is like, because there's a lot of that turns into people being like, oh, well, you don't have a, you know, mental condition, you just have demons, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't get into that, but
what,
you know, that's something that is a reality too. I remember one time, it was actually a little bit ago, I had a little spurt of like just not taking stuff seriously, really. So I don't really pray to any deity, or I don't have any. I don't see deity or entity as like higher. I will pay respect or honor to certain things that I come across. You know, I'll be out in the forest, and if there's a energy there that I feel like is there and it wants to communicate or transfer energy or different things, I want to do something that's going to honor it, or different things. Like, you know, it's respect, right? Just
right.
respect.
I agree.
You know, my heritage is my family's Scottish and Irish, and so I really do genuinely think that there's a merit to it. So anyway, I made a joke. Not in 2 days, I fell down the stairs 3 times was just like one thing after another, like things happening to me. And I was like, what is going on? I was so ticked off. I was like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And my girlfriend was like, did you get hexed, or what happened? And I was like, I know what it is. I know what it is. I'm not respecting the entities that are around me, that I interact with, because either of myself, my family, or whatever else. Like, I'm not respecting these things. And so as soon as I did, you know, I did my little offering, my little ritual, and things were fine, smooth sailing. But it was just really funny because I was just like, as soon as I didn't take it seriously, things started happening. Now, whether that is my subconscious affecting my ability to walk down the flight of stairs, I don't know.
I need consolation. There was the woman who used the one who inspired me to get my own dowsing rods, and she was asking questions of spirit, and she was asking all kinds of questions. And one of the questions in one of the TikTok videos was, "Are the fae or do fairies exist?" And it crossed, and it was like yes. And I was like, "That's interesting." I think so too, because it's like you hear about people doing, DMT, and you have the DMT elves and stuff like that. And what's crazy
That's all
is,
super connected.
and I say crazy, but I mean cool. Like what's cool about it is that why is it so many people will do DMT and stuff and then see these similar things? And like
Right.
Graham Hancock is saying that there is a research facility somewhere where they're actually mapping out these realms because of the consistency of the reports coming from the people who use these drugs. And
Yes, it was. They were, if I'm remembering it right, is that they were intravenously feeding these people
yeah,
with a certain dose of DMT to keep them under that level of state.
yeah, because they can stay longer. Because he said normally it's a lot shorter, but now they have like the drip drip.
Where is it?
I don't
Should I
know.
set
I'm
it up?
I'm gonna I'm gonna look it up now because I've thought about it. I was like, that's cool, but didn't look it up. And I'm like, now I want to know. Like,
People were talking about at Skinwalker Ranch were like, for some reason, there's stuff that just likes to mess with us. Stuff that just is doing it out of going against what we think it's going to do. So there's a trickster element to it. The gentleman who interviewed David Grusch,
oh, Ross.
yes, I really loved his interviews.
Yeah.
All the processes behind, what David Grusch has had to do to come out. The fact that he faces legal prosecution if he lies under oath to Congress, intelligence community, and you have all these layers that he's had to go through. That if he is lying, he will go to prison.
Right.
So you have all these things where he's explaining as a reporter who's dealt with intelligence. He's like, these are all the avenues these people have to go through that we just think,
Yeah.
oh, it's just a guy coming out and talking about it. It's not how that works.
Yeah, they even
So-
had Tim Burchett, the congressman, came out and he said that the Pentagon, they're supposed to have a hearing on all this, on the evidence piling up that there is a shadow organization pulling the strings without oversight, and they're putting these hearings together. They're supposed to happen at the end of the month. And he just flat out said that the Pentagon has been reaching out to their witnesses and whistleblowers, telling them not to testify. And he says, if you do that, we'll subpoena you and then we will force them to testify because this has to come out. So it's just like you have all this stuff, Grusch, you have Greer, you have all these things piling up. And it just, I feel like they're doing everything they can to contain it. The only story that I've seen come out is just the David Grusch story that forced all the mainstream outlets to cover this, but they haven't covered Greer.
Ross and David Grusch coming out and talking about all this information, it correlates with what he's been saying this whole time. There's a lot of details that line up all together that are just like, why is this all lining up with officials? And that's not even going into the researcher who did the 2050 remote viewing of
Oh
2,000
yeah,
subjects, all the data.
I was interested when you brought that up, when you told me to watch that one, and I watched that one, and then when he starts mentioning the little boxes, which sound exactly like what Greer was freaking describing for free energy devices.
Yep.
And I'm like, yo,
It's wild.
It's crazy. And it's just, there's these points in time that seem to be like coming out. And I hope it's in my lifetime because I would love to see that. I mean, I don't want to pay utility bills or gas anymore. Like I don't, and that's the thing with people arguing against it. I'm like, dude, do you want free energy or not? Like, do you want to keep paying gas? Because
I'm sure if it comes out, oh yeah, we invented this technology, but we're gonna pay you're gonna pay subscription. I'm thinking, fine. At least free energy, though. A lot of people assume remote viewing is just you individually getting information down and giving it to somebody.
mm-hmm.
The most effective way to do remote viewing is having multiple people correlating from the same location,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're getting corresponding information that crosses over. So then, you have
That makes more sense. Yeah.
is the coordinator that they can actually figure out the data sets that, yes, this information is correct. So the fact that he did over 2,000 subjects of remote viewing, all correlated various amounts of data, including back in the 80s, right before the AIDS virus, or all the different technology leaps, religious violence in the form of terrorism, all this stuff that they weren't thinking about that in the 80s. All this data sets that line up with that. It's hard for me to not take that seriously
Yeah.
because it lines up with how we understand time and space anyway. Time and space are not
And
finite, right?
And that's also something I wanted to ask you about in regards to remote viewing. I wrote it down here and I wanted to know your thoughts because this is something that comes up in near-death experiences as well. But my understanding in remote viewing too is what most people don't realize. It's not just viewing a location and leaving the body and going to go see somewhere. Essentially, when you can remote view, you can access any point in time, past, future, and it's this understanding that everything is here and now, which is exactly what near-death experiencers are saying when they go into that altered state of consciousness, that everything is here and now and there isn't time over there. It's everything's more accessible. I wanted to ask you about that.
I would 100% agree with that statement. There's certain people that don't think remote viewing is legitimate because of potential details getting wrong. That's one reason why you have multiple remote viewers, because if they can correlate similar data, then you have discrepancies, because you might get these discrepancies either from your own perspective or from potentially you go into an area and you might be maybe in the wrong time.
Parallel realities also. Like what if you're viewing something, but it's somewhere else, but it's the same place, but somewhere else.
I'll share for my own experience what I would do to try to get clear information. So I would stay in that spot and see what details came through. And then I would mentally scrub that data, like that area, and try to blank in my mind. And I would see what details stayed and what others dissipated. And then those details that were solid, I would correlate that data. And that usually helped me have a higher percentage of accuracy. There were some days I had stuff going on that I just wasn't super accurate, but that would be a process I would do to try to get as clean data as possible. So I know that there's other people, again, I wasn't particularly part of any military group or anything that had massive teams where they're just being able to go through all this data on like a data sheet and figuring out exactly like what are the higher percentages of accurate information. But that was one personal thing that I would do, more accurate readings.
I'll say something with me, and then I had one last question for you. But with me, it was the mediumship stuff, which I haven't been practicing as much as I should. But I started having experiences with connecting with deceased loved ones. And for me, I know there's different types of mediums. With me, it's more of a mental imagery and a knowing. I don't know how to describe it. Just I'll see an image in my head of who or whatever it is, and then they're not moving their lips to tell me information. I just know what they mean. I feel what they mean, I guess. And at first I thought I was going crazy or I was worried about being accurate. But my teacher described that even if you think it's not accurate or whatever, don't worry about it because the information isn't for you. It's for whoever. So that could also help if someone who wasn't there and then you tell them about the remote view, for example. And when I started asking people about things that I shouldn't have known, because that's what I asked, I was like, if this is real, give me something that I wouldn't know, but that they would know. And they were giving me stuff and I would, tell my mom or my aunt and they're like, yeah. And they start giggling like, because I didn't know that information. They know I didn't know that information because it's not something they shared with me. So things like that. But my question is, there is a point where I was meditating and I all of a sudden blanked out. It was almost like I was having no thoughts or anything. I was just blanked out. But then it started to feel like I could actually see with my eyes closed. And then I had asked a friend about it and she told me that she's like, you were in a trance. Because when I got out of it, I didn't realize, where I was, even though it was my own bedroom. I was like, well, where am I? And my girlfriend was next to me trying to meditate too. And she's like, you all right? What happened? And I was like, why are you here? For like a second, I had no recollection that, you know, I was there meditating, that I did this in my bed, in my bedroom. It was almost like, you know, akin to like, this never happened to me, but good comparison, I guess. Waking up drunk in someone else's apartment and you're like, oh, what's going on? And you're like, so that happened to me. And I wasn't really sure. I have that to go off of what she told me. She says, you were in a trance, but I don't know if you have any idea what I might have been experiencing or.
You got into a really deep state of consciousness. I've had that experience as well. Data streaming right to this location, getting information. But then when you like get in that altered state, like then you like 90% of yourself like transfers over there.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good way. That helps clarify it. Just that analogy, that helps clarify that. That makes more sense to me now. I've only gone that deep twice, where I woke up saying like, whoa. Yeah. Sometimes I don't practice as much as I should have, but to be honest, it's only when I practice like that I got the very accurate mediumship scenarios when I did that. Right. And
I just want to ask you, like, personally, did you feel more present and like more real than your normal kind of floating through life and just kind of doing stuff? How did that feel versus normal?
Definitely felt real. There is a moment, there are instances when I get into that state of quieting the mind down where, oh, I got bills to pay, I got to do it, and all of that shutting off. Sometimes you don't realize it. And in the meditation communities, they call this the gap, or right. That you don't know you're in the gap until you're leaving it. So there's like a big moment of that. But then when I see the imagery, I try to go along with it instead of questioning. I've definitely had, at least in a waking state, no meditation, none of this, but I've had moments in life where waking reality doesn't feel real, which has only happened a handful of times, where it's just like, what is this? This is so like, is this real? This doesn't feel real. I know there's something else. This is not.
That conscious awareness that you're like going to come down and you're going to settle back in your body, and then you're going to forget about this external connection.
Yeah.
I don't want to do it. Don't make me.
And that's what near-death experiencers say. And some of them had children, and they're like, I'm not going back there. And they also talk about how hard and difficult it is to come here, not just because of what it's like here, but
right.
The vibrationally how to come down here. They describe it as painful to compress your expansiveness into. One guy actually described it as, he said it's like being shoved through a sieve, through a screen door into a tuna can. And they also have to deal with this processing reality, because that reality was way more real than this reality. Just kind of like akin to.
And you're like, it's slowly being dimmed.
Exactly.
Going more and more until you're like back here. And then you're just like, no, I don't want to pay bills. I don't want to be like worried about
exactly
my daily life and like my anxiety or whatever dumb stuff that I got to deal with, that I concentrate on, and then I'm not ever present with either my family. All this stuff where you're just like, God damn it, I don't want to deal with this.
Right.
Like, I want to be more presently in consciousness aware.
Right. I did have one experience. I was completely awake, coming home from work, went to the grocery store, got some groceries, Monday and stuff, and I'm walking back to my place, and I take one step, and I guess you would call this a spiritually transformative experience. I've had strong deja vu before, but this was the strongest I have ever. Only happened once in this particular fact. The way this felt only happened once. I came into the awareness. It was like the veil lifted. And I'm just like, what did I do to prompt this? Because I just walked. I knew who I really was. I knew why I came down to earth. You could ask me any question. I knew that we don't actually die. I knew that this shell wasn't really me. And it was just this like mind-blowing epiphany. And I was there it was strong. I was there for like 5 minutes. Like, whoa, that I was literally where I was supposed to be, because I had planned it. And it was just like and then I feel it going away, and I'm like, no. I was like, I also had a dream like that too. I also had a dream where I woke, I knew everything, and then it was super surreal. And this one was started in dream state, but when I came out of it, I was like, no, you're like grasping for it, and it's just I felt dumb. To be honest, I felt dumb. I was like, I was like, damn it. I was like, what the hell? And it's such a weird thing. Like, how could you give this to me and then take it away? But I know, I remember the experience. I remember it happening. So
There's a mourning that comes with it, honestly, and I feel it 100% feel you. I know what that feels like. There was a particular remote viewer, I don't remember his name right now, but he was part of the Stargate program. He decided to remote view to where apparently these ETs are like this federation, like their home planet was.
At the end of this inclined corridor is a large room with a very high vaulted ceiling. There is a large polished stone platform in this room like an altar. There are white-robed entities in a semicircle to one side. Their attention seems to be focused on the platform. The room is dimly lit. There is a feeling of something sacred, holy, almost religious about this place. This place seems familiar, as if I've been here before. I climb into the platform and lie down. I was then illuminated by a brilliant shaft of white light from head to toe. The light was coming from overhead. A robed figure then moved from behind the group and stood next to me with a hand outstretched over my solar plexus. Mel Riley, 1988. Remote viewing.
They communicated to him himself, and they're like, you know, you can't stay here. They like transferred energy into him, and then he like went back into his body while experiencing. When I heard about that, I was just like, there was a part of me that was just like, I forgot about that, because he was talking about like his explanation why that was the temple, the place, the holy place that in the universe essentially like, they express their reverence for the full essence of consciousness or reality or whatever we call it, you know. And that really, I don't know, that felt really just like being in religion and stuff, like there's elements of it that make sense, but it's really misconstrued and not there.
missing stuff.
Misunderstanding of things, and where there's like certain aspects of like if there was like huge ET, you know, civilization where, you know, they want us to be part of it, and then they have this like oneness of worshiping our interconnectivity, how we are in reality.
From what I understand, they essentially did have more of these truths in a lot of these religious texts, but they were removed and kind of like censored to just slowly to like
That's
just
a whole other podcast I could go into about religious. That's one of my other study fun. I think we should stop.
But thank you guys for watching. Be sure to follow Greydruid on TikTok, and you're also on Instagram. Is it the same name, right?
Same. Then I just started a YouTube, but I've been trying to mainly focus on TikTok.
Thank you guys for watching, and catch you guys on the other side.